All right, everybody. Thank you for coming over. We're going to spend the next half an hour talking about diversifying your customers, why to do it. We're going to show some industry trends of why it makes so much sense not to have all your eggs in one customer segment. We'll talk about diversifying materials a little bit, and then really when we're talking about going into multiple customer segments, what that does to your operations and how you can avoid some problems that you may naturally have by trying to focus on, say, a track builder and a high-end retail at the same time with the same people. So we're going to share a little bit of that. Real briefly about the three of us, my name's Rich Katzmann. I run the Rockheads Group. If you are unfamiliar with the Rockheads Group, we are a best practices benchmarking networking group of the 118 largest fabricators across the country. Our members share information with each other. We go to events, we network with each other. Basically, everybody just tries to lift each other up. Mickey, why don't you go ahead and talk about your background a little?
My name is Ed Young, and my name is Mickey Gault, and I had my own fabrication shop. I've been in fabrication for 20 years, had my own small shop, and then I worked with a really large company on the East Coast with multiple locations. So from the fabrication side, I'm currently in the software side of the industry. So we have a software solution for fabricators.
How many years with the shop?
With shop, 20 years.
20 years
20
with
years
the shop.
with shops. Yeah.
Beautiful. Mr. Young?
My name is Mickey, I'm Ed Young with FabricatorsCoach.com, where we believe what we do is work with shop owners to help them reduce chaos, make more money, and get their life back. Otherwise, what's the point? My background is I have run a fab shop, I have owned my own brick and mortar business, and I've run a lot of manufacturing plants in other industries as well. So kind of a broad background and a good understanding of manufacturing and business.
Nice mix. Perfect, perfect. And just a bit of housekeeping. If you can't hear us or want a copy of this presentation, Coverings is making it available afterwards. So hang in there. It's not me, it's the clicker. I'm going to keep saying that. I've already mentioned kind of what we're going to talk about, so let's just dig into it, right? Why diversify your business? You know, what does it mean, and why do it? Why don't you guys kind of kick that off and give me your thoughts?
Okay. So when we're talking about diversification, you're seeing some segments on here that we tend to categorize that diversification as. So big box, your production builder versus custom builders, commercial, your dealer or reseller or cabinet companies, as well as your retail, so walk-in. And each one of those segments kind of brings its own challenges, right? And that's what we're going to talk about and how to break into those different markets if you're looking to diversify. And of course, I think within the Rockheads Group, and they tend to be, larger fabricators, you'll see diversification all throughout that group.
Absolutely, sure.
And the reason diversification is important, as I'm sure you already know, is that as some market segments go up, others may be going down. Right now, you'll see some data that indicates kind of what the trends look like here in some future slides. But if you're all heavily invested in one market segment, it starts trending down and you're not prepared to move over into a different segment, that can be a big move, and we'll talk about some of those challenges. So having a diversified approach to your market and market segments and your materials can give you a lot of good safety, can make your company a lot healthier, and help you weather some of the upturns and downturns that happen with the economy.
Sure, risk mitigation, right? It's all about risk mitigation. And when we talk about diversifying segments, it's very similar to a financial portfolio, right? Maybe you want some aggressive stocks in there, you want some cash, more stable, you want some bonds. You want to be able to endure whatever happens to the market. So you're giving up maybe a little risky profit, but you're really ensuring yourself on the downside that you're going to be covered. And that's really why we're talking about this. Here's some really interesting projections that are all pretty recent. If you look at the multifamily trends over the last 15 years, and what they're doing is they're dropping rapidly. So a lot of shops have been living really well off of multifamily projects. And depending on the city, a lot of those are going away. We're going to show some more numbers here in a second. Consumer remodel, designer remodel are trending up for the next couple of years. So we're looking at much stronger retail business. Commercial business is flat. and might be off just a little bit. So I've got a little summary here of all of the different segments. Big box retail from 23 to 24, so we're talking about this year, is projected to grow at 4%. Builder business, about that same 4%. But look at multifamily. Across the country, multifamily in 24 is projected to be 22% lower than 23. And I've got a next slide on this one too that's got some leading indicators. Commercial business, I mentioned flat. In some segments, it's actually growing. So schools, churches, they're actually growing a little bit. Other areas, office space is really dropping. So depending on the sub-segment, commercial is dropping here too. And then dealer business is really the growth area for this year. So we've got, this is kind of the case in point as to why diversification makes sense. If you're 90% multifamily, it could be a rough year for you.
Well, and it's interesting because, these are the leading indicators. These are your building permits especially, right? So if you drive through the Charlotte, North Carolina area, where I'm from, you're going to see all these multifamily, construction projects still going up, right? Not a lot of new ones now that now that I see this, but if you'd asked me what would be a great segment to get into, I would have said that would be a good way to go based on all the building.
Kind of missed it.
But,
you missed the boat.
But so these leading indicators, we're not seeing this hit the market yet. So.
And part of that is because commercial's got such a longer project time. The planning, the permitting, and all the contracting has to be done. So it's going to be a lagging. Commercial tends to lag the economic cycles. So if you look at economic cycles going up and down, your commercial type work tends to lag that because of the long lead times for those projects. But keep in mind too, these are national averages. We've got some future slides that'll start talking about what's happening geographically in different states, and you can see a totally different picture depending on where you live.
And this is my favorite slide to make that point. Just from the National Association of Home Builders. This just looks at state by state multifamily permits versus single family permits. And I'm from Chicago, so in Chicago we're looking at a 43% decline in multifamily permits. Conversely in Chicago, I'm looking at a 29% increase in single family permits. Again, leading indicators. So, when we look at the nation as a whole, it tells one story, but when you start looking at it state by state, it can tell a completely different story.
And I found out too that even within some of these areas, like some of these states on the left-hand side that are kind of orange or they're red because they're in decline, I have run across shops that are really well run. In fact, I've got a former client in Illinois who's growing about 10 or 15% a year, doing a lot of multifamily and a lot of other single family as well, but he's in a state that's declining overall. So sometimes getting it at less than a state level, micro view, and then also how well you run your shop and the value proposition you've got for your customers can actually have you run counter to that trend as well. You think about Central Texas being super hot. Well, I've talked to shops in Central Texas that are struggling, and it's because of how they run their business. So there are other factors that can impact this as well.
Good.
All right, so we put this slide up in the benchmarking data, and because we're talking about different customer segments, I wanted to present what the Rockheads Group is selling work to the different segments. So if you look at all the Rockheads across all of the different customer segments, the group averages just under $80 a foot is the average price to the customer. But now if you look at big box stores, right, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, now you're down to $64 a foot if you're doing big box work. Getting even a little lower, if you're doing track production building, now you're down to $60 a foot. And as we keep climbing back up, custom builder, right? Higher than the average to custom builders. Commercial projects, surprisingly, $84 a foot. You're not giving up any margin on those. Dealers, resellers coming in, $93 a foot. And then the most expensive category, retail, almost $100 a foot.
Yeah, and keep in mind, these are all-in prices. This isn't that $35 a foot to get you the door kind of price. This is your all-in, what the customer is paying for the job.
Yeah. So again, this is a really good example of what the different customer segments can do to your business. Whoop. All right, now we're going to shift gears a little bit. So that's kind of the what's happening in the industry, why diversification is important. Let's flip the coin now, and with you two operators, let's talk about what effects each of these categories or diversification can have to each of these categories.
Sure, so Salesforce, the first item on the list. If you're getting into commercial space or multifamily or perhaps even dealer programs, now you're switching from really that sales skill component to more of the estimating and pricing, and perhaps even a little bit of project management and carrying in all those details. So the amount of work shifts in those categories from being that direct sales connector with your retail client into more of the office or the back end, the pricing processing component.
And also the nature of the sales process. If you've got people in a showroom who are really good at decorating, really good at relating to people, they like having customers come to them. You're going to go out and go after commercial work, or you're going to go out and try to sign up some more kitchen and bath dealers. You need a hunter-gatherer. You need somebody who's got this blood sport. I want to go out and kill something. Running for the numbers, trying to make as many contacts as they can. They're not talking about decorating colors. It's a whole different sales process.
Ed, let me ask you a question here based on your consulting. From a sales force, from a sales perspective, what percent of shops do you see that have the salesman take the project, kind of all the way through the project management side to the end, versus a salesman that as soon as they close the sale, they hand it off to a project manager and then the project manager runs with it?
The first scenario from my experience is typically like 10 to 20% of shops, because if you think about it, the secret sauce, the core capability of a salesperson is that ability to connect, generate a quote, and turn that quote to an order. Anything they have to do outside of that takes away from their ability to generate more sales for you. So if they're helping manage a project all the way through the end, it's hurting your ability to generate sales. So I think people that really understand that will have other ways of managing projects and shepherding projects and customers through the end of the process. Let that salesperson go out and get another one.
And generally, they might be really good at design, but not necessarily good at passing on all those little details.
Amen.
That we know to get the project right.
All right, let's talk cash flow.
Yeah.
Right, certainly the segments that we talked about have huge variations in cash flow.
Absolutely. So if you get in the commercial space, there is something called a retainage, right? So 10% of the amount typically is held back until the entire project is done and marked complete at that point. So that's a long time that you're waiting for that last percent to get paid, that last 10%. So that has a major impact there. Whereas, big box, for instance, you could get down the business, but it's the lowest margin, right? So you get paid right away, but lowest margin. So you have to have really tight processes within your business to be successful there.
And then you've got the long cycle. Think about doing a multifamily building that's got a couple of hundred units. We're not going to do all those in one day or in 1 week, but you may have to get all that material in up front. Yeah, you may have 30-day terms, but that project's going to take you more than 30 days. So you're paying for all that material and paying your labor and the overhead for your shop. And then your GC, depending on what the contract terms are, they may be paying you net 30, which will easily stretch to net 45, net 60. And then you've got retainage on top of that. So you get a big slug of work coming through your shop, and you've got to fund that work up front and wait a long time to get paid in many cases.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but since we are talking about cash flow, a couple of years ago, the Rockheads had a huge initiative to move all of our members on the deposit versus the paid in full for their retail customers. And we had about 80%, about 75% of our shops go to 100% funds in before the material was touched. And we had zero backlash from the customers. Home Depot does it, right? Everybody else out there does it. And at first people were hesitant, but as more and more members did it, everybody started jumping on board. Your installers are not collection agencies. You don't want to give the customer the chance to be picky about anything. Depot's charging them all up front anyway. So get that money before you cut the stone.
Amen and amen.
Yep.
All right, Mick, at Fabrication. What changes, for example, if you're doing L's every day for depot versus you're doing intricate, lobby, commercial projects, or even multifamily projects? What happens to the skills of fabrication? What do you have to change?
The good news is technology has closed the gap on a lot of this. The bad news is it hasn't totally closed the gap. Back in the days before we had all this CNC machinery, the skills of your people were tough to do. Do rectangles and L's with eased edge all day for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden do something really high-end custom. With technology, you can help manage that a lot better, but it's still a big, big challenge. I had a client, for example, in the UK a few years ago that was doing, their typical kitchens were, rectangles, L's, and eased edge, and they were about 35 to 40 square feet. But in the same shop, they were doing high-end custom design work that they would ship to Dubai, commercial type work that was super high-end. And what they ended up doing was they would cut everything on the same cutting machines, saw jets, and then they would split the flow. The rectangles, L's, and eased edge work would go through some certain machines and certain fabricators that focused on that quality of work. Their high-end custom went to a different part of the shop because it was a totally different skill set. Finding the high-end craftsman to do both of those work really well is really tough these days because we're getting older. And the newer guys coming in just don't have the years. They don't have the time if they have the interest. So it gets to be a really tough challenge if you're in one segment and want to move into another one. You got to get prepared for it.
Yeah, sure.
So on the template and install side, it's vastly different than the fabrication side. There are very, very few installers that will be extremely successful in both the retail work and commercial work, for instance, or any other segment, because that person that is willing to go in and really provide that great customer experience to the homeowner and walk them through what you're about to do and all that caring and hand-holding that's necessary to be successful there is actually counterproductive when you need to get people the heck out of your way so you can blaze your trail and get your pieces down in the other business lines. So very few can cross over. You almost need to have some specialization there to be successful. Templater, it's kind of the same thing. There's a little more crossover available, but they need to also make sure that the area is clean and ready to go and understand all the complexities of an actual set of plans versus what you might find when you go into a homeowner, right? So.
And if you're lucky enough to have people with enough skills to do both of these in the fab side and the template side and the install side, good for you, but managing that's going to be a big challenge. So there are exceptions to what we're talking about, but in general, what we're talking about applies to most everybody.
Sure. So after we had this discussion yesterday, I'm going to put you guys on the spot. I had a shop come up to me, smaller shop come up to me and say, all right, I'm almost all retail walk-in. I want to get into some other segments. Are there some baby steps I could take, or do I need to just go all in? So do you guys have any advice on, go for it.
First thing is, the groups like Rockheads, ISFA, and some of the other groups out there is a great place to start, because by design, there are fabricators that are in those groups that are willing and open to share, and many of those already have diversified portfolios. So if you get there, you can be connected to somebody that is an expert in that area. You could likely go to their shop, see how it operates, and see how you can plan to get into that market.
Excellent advice. That's absolutely the best answer. To add a little bit to that is you probably start looking at working with some contractors and maybe a couple of kitchen and bath stores. But I agree, talking to other fabricators who've done that before, because there are pluses and minuses to both, making that kind of move is a lot easier than going into commercial, for example. So just a couple of things to think about.
Well, the other things to think about, tooling, right? So how is your shop set up? Do you have the tools that can, both in the fab shop, but also in the office, to be able to accommodate all those business lines? There are tools out there now in software that your dealers or those cabinet companies can actually produce their own quotes in your system for your evaluation and approval, and then they can even see their schedule. So, you get tooled properly for these endeavors as well.
Very cool. And then within the Rockheads, we talk a lot about big box, because a lot of our guys do a lot of big box. And generally the consensus in the advice that we hand out, most of the time a Lowe's, a Depot is going to want to give you 6 to 8 stores to start, kind of a test, a pilot for them. It is impossible to make money at 6 to 8 stores, right? The number that our members have found, you've got to be at 20 if you're going to make money with big box. So if you've got the capital, if you've got the ability to not make any money for a couple of years, it can be, or a year, it can be very productive. But they're going to want you at 6 to 8. A lot of times they will give you 20, but you've got to ask for the more stores. And that's just something that our group has found out. We've got a ton of big box guys in our group.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on, before we kind of wrap everything up, on what diversification can do, what advice you guys have?
Well, we really didn't cover diversification of product types.
Oh yeah,
right?
great, yeah.
So if you're considering in the commercial space, and the commercial doesn't have to be the big commercial space, the 26th floor Bank of America building in Charlotte or whatever, I survived. But you could get into those dental offices and things, right? And oftentimes those dental offices, maybe even dorms, those might require some solid surface as well because of the hygiene involved with those integral bowls and the seams. So, consider that diversification across your product lines as well. If you're going to stick with retail and be really good at that, consider how you can offer and get more of that total project dollar coming in through tile work or some other sales efforts in that regard.
Absolutely, that's great advice. Tile work is a little easier to integrate into an existing countertop shop. I have a lot of time, we'll talk to folks who are struggling to make a profit with countertops, and they'll want to go bring on a cabinet line. And if you can't do countertops well, don't bring on cabinets. Just tell you, because it's a totally different animal, it's different software, different processes, different sales process. Make sure if you're going to diversify product lines that you're profitable and confident with what you already have, because you're going to take some of those resources from your profitable business to go focus on this new product line. And you got to make sure you don't hurt yourself in your primary business.
And then I've got one on the material side too. We have a shop out of Florida that what he's done, we call him the king of porcelain. We kind of joke about it. But what he does is people walk into the shop, they want a white vein quartz, and he'll immediately upgrade him to porcelain, so they're paying more because he knows none of his local competitors will do porcelain. So he is winning all of that business instead of having to negotiate or have it walk out the door because he's the only one doing it.
Yeah, know your market.
Yeah.
And it goes back to knowing what you're good at, knowing what your value proposition is to your customer, and then communicating that effectively to help drive the types of sales that make the most money for you.
Nice. I think we're out of time.
Questions?
Yep. Thank you guys for listening to this. We are just about out of time, but we do have a couple of minutes left for questions, if anybody has any questions.
And while you're thinking of questions, if you want a copy of these slides, hit this QR code, put in your email address, we'll email it to you. We're not going to try to sell you something else. A lot of times folks have got additional questions. They want to talk with other fabricators and do a little deeper dive. Then we're going to have a webinar set up for June where we'll talk about this topic. Hit this QR code and you can sign up for that webinar as well.
And lastly, I'd just like to comment on how well you color coordinated today, Rich. Yes. You look phenomenal.
You guys are good looking guys. Thanks, everybody.
Somebody get this man a pair of glasses.